My name is Jason Spangler. I'm the Flooring Division Sales Manager for Wagner Meters, responsible for the Rapid RH product line and also for wood meters for testing wood substrates and finished wood products. So before I get started, though, two things. One thing is keep in mind this is a live Q&A for most of you at least. So if you do have any questions, please don't hesitate to type them in and email them to me while I'm here. But if for some reason I don't get to your question, or if for some reason you think of something after the fact, make sure you jot down my phone number. Again, my name is Jason Spangler. Phone number is 800-634-9961, and it's extension 235. So that's the first thing. Don't forget your questions, and if you have any questions after the fact, call me directly. More than happy. That's what I'm here for, is to help you with the questions. But the second thing is I do have to duck out just for a second and let you at least see the backdrop, because I have a coworker that works with me who painstakingly set that whole thing up, and then realized when I sat down in front of it that I was going to be covering up all the Halloween festivities that we were trying to bring to everybody from the wonderful world of Southern Oregon. So anyway, I want to make sure I at least push that out or showed that to you guys. Couple of questions that I have. First one that I have, what is the lowest RH we would or could expect to see in concrete over 1 year old and under 1 year old? Could we ever expect to see a 50% RH reading or below? I can tell you, and this came from Brian, I can tell you, Brian, I have not personally been on a job where I've seen 50% relative humidity or below. I can tell you that I have not ever, in all honesty, had somebody tell me they had received a reading or had a reading like that and not been able to really push it off to the fact that they weren't getting an appropriate seal of the sensor at the bottom of the hole. And what they were actually picking up was the ambient relative humidity as opposed to the relative humidity at that very depth specific measurement in the concrete. So one way to actually find out whether it's a legitimate reading, and again, I'm not going to say that there aren't. Have some guys in Canada that have contacted me and they've told me that they consistently do get some very low relative humidities in the 50s. Haven't seen anything below, but they do say in the 50s. They haven't been able to say that the device is measuring inaccurately or is measuring in a situation where it's picking up ambient conditions. The best way to compare it, though, or the best way to verify, is to be able to sit there, install the sensor, leave it for the 3 days, install it in the concrete, and when you come back, you should be taking, prior to taking any actual measurements, you should be taking ambient condition measurements, so temperature and relative humidity in the air itself. Utilize that information and compare it against what you're actually seeing in the concrete or what the sensor's reading for you. If they are close, and I say close, I'm going to throw out, say 5 to 10%, and those are ambiguous numbers, but fairly close numbers. You're going to see that you can almost every time that should be suspect that for whatever reason, the hole was drilled a little bit too big. It was drilled off center, so that when the sensor was going into the hole, those exterior fins on the sensor barrel were not fitting, the crush fit against the sidewalls of that concrete to ensure that you're just reading that very, very specific airspace at the bottom of the hole. So hopefully that answers that part of the question. Over 1 year, under 1 year, that's a loaded question. It really depends on what the condition of the concrete was after it was. I mean, I always tell people that duration of time for concrete to be poured has nothing to do with drying. Absolutely nothing. I know that's probably contrary to what many people hear, but it has nothing to do with it. And I say that in the scheme of the scheme of everything is the fact that I can't sit here and tell you that absolutely if you pour concrete today that in 1 year it's going to be dry, because I don't know what's happened between the D-Day of it being poured and placed to what's happened 12 months later. If you have the appropriate conditions, depending on the thickness of the concrete, yes, 12 months would be something realistically that you could sit there and say the concrete should be dry. The only thing you can say is that once a building is enclosed, once the conditions in that building are conducive for drying, meaning it has some semblance of consistent heat and some level of reasonable relative humidity, once those conditions are met, then you're going to see where that concrete's going to start drying. Usually that happens once the building is enclosed. Usually that happens once permanent heat HVAC is on. But in essence, the heat is going to allow the moisture to start to move up in the concrete. The low relative humidity in the air is going to give the moisture in the concrete a space to go to, because if you have high relative humidity in the air in the room, the high relative humidity in the concrete is not going to be able to be transferred into the air because the levels are going to be too high already. So you're looking for that differential between high relative humidity in the concrete, low relative humidity in the air, that goes along with the moisture moving up because of higher temperature, if you will, in the room. So, again, if you want to look at a 1 year, most of the time, if you look at the Portland Cement Association, they have it published in there that once a building is, or once an area is conducive for drying, as I stated, you're typically looking at 30 days for every 1 inch of slab thickness for a slab to dry to a fairly appropriate level, somewhere in that 85% relative humidity ballpark. So a fairly acceptable level for most types of finished floor products. So again, I hope that answered the question. Second question that I had. When we're dealing with pan decking, when we're dealing with elevated slabs, second-story floors, and you have pan decking that has inconsistent thicknesses of concrete. I have people that will call and ask me about, how deep do I drill? If I have 3 inches of coverage of concrete in one area and 6 inches in the deepest area, how do I calculate my 40% depth? And the first thing I have to tell everybody is that absolutely the ASTM standard is silent on this situation. With that being said, there are numerous, there's a couple different ways that people are utilizing or doing this type of testing in elevated slabs. The first way they're doing it, and one of the ways that we recommend, is to identify those high spots or the areas of less concrete coverage within that floor. And the way to do that very easily is there are a few different. One of the products that I use it's made by Bosch, and it's actually a metal detector, but it looks much like a stud finder that you would use to identify wood studs in a sheetrocked home. You just put it on the surface of the concrete and you scan across, and it'll beep at the high spots. So it's strong enough that it'll pick up the metal in the high spots, but it's not so strong that it'll go, full penetration and get the bottom of that pan. So you can pretty much identify a high spot, and drill in the middle of that. So you're going to drill 40% of what the thickest area of that floor is, and consistently do that throughout the floor, and that's how you would identify it. One of the ways that the ASTM community is looking at right now is they're looking at trying to come up with what they call an effective thickness calculation. So they're going to take, in essence, the shallowest coverage, and they're going to take a portion of the deeper coverage. They're going to average it out and allow you to drill 40% of that anywhere on the floor. Everybody really liked that idea when it was brought up, but there's really not a lot of science to back it up. So there's some additional testing and additional discussions that are going on revolving around that. Last question. When you're on a slab that is on grade or below grade, determining slab thickness, I always tell people do everything you can to try to get construction documents to be able to ensure that you're going or doing as much due diligence as possible to figure out the thickness of the slab. Is it a rehab? Is there trenching that's going on where they're moving plumbing from point A to point B that maybe you can look at that prior to them backfilling or replacing concrete in those trenches to determine original thickness? Barring that, one way that people are doing it is they're taking a smaller diameter drill bit, and in a few, and I say a few, don't turn the slab into Swiss cheese, but in a few strategic areas of the floor, drill all the way through the slab to determine the effective thickness, or to determine the thickness of the concrete. Usually they'll drill through the slab, they'll take a piece of pliable wire, they'll make a J-hook in it, they'll push it down all the way through that hole to the bottom of the slab, pull it up until they have the tension on the bottom of it hooked on the bottom of the slab itself. Take a Sharpie and mark it off, and then you can look at the difference between where that J-hook was at and where the Sharpie mark's at to be able to see what the thickness is. Usually I don't hear people doing much more than a couple of those just to verify that there isn't some huge discrepancy between one area of the floor and another area of the floor. Again, you've done your due diligence at that point. Determination of the 40% is based off of that. So anyway, with that being said, doesn't look like I have any additional questions. Again, my name is Jason Spangler. My phone number is 800-634-9961, extension 235. If there is anything that you guys think of, any questions, comments, concerns that you'd like to bring up to me, please do so. And with that, have a great Halloween and great holidays if I don't see you before then. Take care.